In this lecture, we're going to go ahead and take our 2 planks of wood and apply them to our drawing. So first, let's go ahead and select both our layers, and then let's merge them together. And using my marquee tool, I'm going to go ahead and select one of them, and then I'm going to copy it and paste it into my drawing document. Then we can go ahead and shrink this down and rotate it. We're going to do the same like we did with our first crate that we created. And we're just going to create a panel of wooden boards. We can also go ahead and drag this up to the top above all of our drawing layers. And we're also going to select all of our drawing layers and put those into a folder so that we can turn them off and on with one click. Now let's go ahead and come back into our document with our texture, and let's select the other plank of wood, copy it, and paste it. And we can go ahead and shrink that down, rotate it, and then we're going to go ahead and shrink that down to scale. Great. Next, let's go ahead and copy this guy right here, and paste him, and bring him to the top. And just like we did before with our first crate, let's go ahead and flip this guy horizontal, and then we're going to flip him vertical. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and grab this guy right here. We're going to select him, copy him, and paste him. We'll drag that up to the top. And then we're going to transform him and flip him horizontal. And then we're going to flip him vertical. Great. Let's hit enter. And lastly, let's go ahead and grab this guy right here, copy him, paste him, and bring him to the top, and get him into position. Now, this guy's not making it all the way up to the very top of our box, and that's okay because we're going to have the frame and the crossing boards going across this, and so you're not going to see this area of that board. Now let's go ahead and merge all these together. And now let's go ahead and make a copy of this layer and drag that copy over like so. Use the transform tool and then right click and come to distort, and we'll just drag these points to the corner of our crate. Great. Let's hit enter. Let's do this once again. We'll copy, drag this guy over, and then use our transform tool, turn on distort, and get these corners in the correct place. Hit enter. And we have a little bit of gap right there, so I'm going to go ahead and use the arrow keys on my keyboard, nudge that over one. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and build our crossing pattern and our frame pattern. So we can turn this guy off, and now we're going to go ahead and copy this guy and paste him in. And this is going to be exactly like what we did with the first crate. So make sure we get that guy's proportions correct and the right size. Hit enter. We're off by 1 pixel, but that's okay. All we have to do is turn on the transform tool and drag that down. Now sometimes it won't let you drag it 1 pixel unless you're zoomed in enough. So let's go ahead and hit enter so we can zoom in. We'll zoom all the way in there. Turn our transform tool back on and drag that down like so. Hit enter. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and turn down the opacity on this layer so we can see this edge right here. And we'll go ahead and just cut that away using our marquee tool. Then we'll turn the opacity back up. Then let's select him, copy him, and paste him. Then we're going to rotate this guy. And remember that we want the shadow edge on the inside of our frame. Then we'll get this guy into position. Now let's go ahead and flip this guy so he's not identical to this one. So we'll go Control T, and then we're going to flip horizontal. We don't want to flip it vertically because that's going to put our shadow on the top, on the bottom. Go ahead and hit enter, and it got nudged over, so we'll nudge him back over with our arrow keys. Let's go ahead and select our other board. Paste that in. Let's shrink it down. Hit enter. We were pretty close. Let's go ahead and shrink it just a little bit more. Do it there. Great. Now let's go ahead and check if we're on the edge. So we want it right there. Let's turn down the opacity so we can see this other edge. We'll select up to that black line and delete. Turn the opacity back up. Now we'll go ahead and select that, copy it, and paste it. Then let's rotate it. Then let's flip it horizontally so it's in the other opposite direction of the previous one. Put that into place. It needs to be stretched out 1 pixel on this side. Now we can hit enter. And this guy right here, he's overlapping right here and he shouldn't be. So we're going to grab that layer and drag it down beneath that layer. Perfect. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and recopy this guy because we want the shadow on both edges. Paste him in. Then let's shrink him down. And then we're going to rotate him to 45 degrees. And then let's go ahead and try to fit him on there as best as possible. About there looks good. Bring that over like so. Perfect. Let's hit enter. Great. Now let's go ahead and drag this guy underneath all of our other boards. And now we can go ahead and grab the other guy. We'll copy him and paste him. Then we'll rotate him 45 degrees, shrink him down, and let's get him lined up. So we'll shrink him to about there, get him into position, then we'll hit enter. Perfect. Now I think this guy is supposed to be going across rather than that guy. So I'm going to go ahead and drag him down like so. Great. Now before we can grab this pattern and apply it to our crate, what we need to do is we need to do a little bit more hand painting to make this look more realistic. So for example, as these two boards meet up right here, there's going to be just as much shadow on this side as there already is right there. So before we do this, let's go ahead and merge all of these boards together. So now those are all one layer. And now we can go ahead and select the shape of that layer so we don't paint anywhere outside of it. And then let's select this dark shadow color. Then using my brush tool, I can go ahead and paint in shadow on this side. So I'm going to put my brush opacity at 3%. We're just going to paint it just like so. This just softens it and makes it look a little bit more realistic. It also makes it look like the pieces of wood are actually butting up next to each other rather than covering each other up. Do the same here. Whoops, I'm noticing that we forgot to merge this guy with him, so I'm going to go ahead and stop what I'm doing. I think it's that layer right there. And I'm going to select both these layers, merge them together, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut off this edge because it's over by 1 pixel. And now we can go ahead and reselect the shape of this and go back to what we were doing. And on these corners, if you can kind of give it a rounded edge to the shadow, it'll make it look a lot more realistic and natural. Great. Next, what we want to do is we want to select our highlight color. So I'm going to grab this guy right here, and we're just going to add a highlight to some of these areas. So for example, we'll add it right here. Because the light is going to generally be coming down from the top, we're only going to add that highlight to these top areas. Just like so. And the reason why we're adding in this highlight is because, like I said, we want it to look like these pieces of wood are on the same level and not one on top of the other. And so by doing this, it makes it look like there's more of a cavern going through right here rather than this piece of wood being on top of that one. We can also add a little bit right there, there, and there. We'll add a little bit there and here. Same with down here. And then we'll add highlight up here. So like I said, just make sure you only add it to the areas that are going to be getting hit with light on the top of them. All right, great. Now we can go ahead and add this to our crate over here. So let's go ahead and make a copy of this layer. It's always important to keep copies. That way you can always come back and redo things. And then we're going to turn the transform tool on, distort, and we'll get that all lined up. Let's do this once more. Copy, drag that over, turn on the transform tool, distort, and then we'll drag it over like so, making sure everything lines up correctly. If we don't get it lined up as perfectly as possible, the perspective is going to look really funny. All right, great. Let's go ahead and nudge this guy over one so we get rid of that line that was in there. Next, what we want to do is we want to add that edge to these boards. If you remember with our first crate, we added the edge on the inside of here to give it more dimension. Well, we're going to do the same thing here. So let's go ahead and select the shape of our layer. And then we're going to add a new layer underneath that. And then let's zoom in here and let's select our shadow color. That's the color we want the edge of our board to be. So I'll select that. Then I'll fill that in. Then using my grab and move tool and the arrow keys on my keyboard, I can go ahead and nudge that over like so. And about 2 times should be good. If you're working on a larger scale, you might have to nudge it over a little bit more. Next, let's go ahead and do the other side. So I'm going to select that shape, add a new layer underneath it, and fill that in with my shadow color. Then I'll nudge that over like so, maybe 3 times. And then we can go ahead and use our marquee tool to select this edge, and we can delete that. Perfect. So now this is looking pretty good. Next, let's go ahead and add in that dark shadow along the edges of the inside of these triangles, like we did with the other crate. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the shape again, then add a new layer underneath it, and we're gonna fill it in with black. And then if you remember, we come up to our filters, come down to blur, and come to Gaussian blur. And right about there should be good. We can play with this a little bit more if we want, see what looks best to us. And I'm gonna leave it there at about 3.8. Hit OK. And then we wanna select the shape underneath it, so this shape right there. And then we'll invert the selection and make sure you're still on this layer that has the black shadow. And then we'll hit delete. Then let's go ahead and turn the opacity down to about 50%. I think that looks good. And let's do the same for our other side. So we'll select that shape, add a new layer underneath it, fill it in with black. And then since we already have our settings set up for the blur, we can go ahead and hit Control F or Command F if you're on a Mac, and that'll automatically apply that. Then we're going to select the shape underneath, invert the selection, hit delete, and then we can go ahead and bring that opacity down to 50%. Now the last thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and add a shadow to one of these sides. So there's an actual highlight and shadow for the entire cube in a whole. So what we're going to do first is we're going to select all of our layers, make a copy of them, put those into a folder so we have those as backup. Then I'm going to turn that off. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab this guy right here, and we're going to drag him down to the bottom so we don't select him in our selection when we merge. And then we're going to select all of our other layers and merge them together. So now that box is one whole layer. Now let's go ahead and add a layer above that. And this time, rather than selecting the shape of our crate and then painting in our shadow, what we're going to do is we're going to create something called a clipping mask. And a clipping mask does a much better job of what we're trying to do. So what you need to do is you need to right click on your layer and then come up to where it says create clipping mask. And now you'll see that layer has moved over and there's a little arrow pointing down to the layer underneath it. That means it's a clipping mask for the layer underneath it, which is the crate. And what the clipping mask does is it doesn't allow you to paint anywhere else except for inside of the shape of the layer that it's a clipping mask for. So let me show you what I mean. Let's select our shadow color. So I'm going to grab a really dark blue. Somewhere in here should be good. And then using my brush tool and moving over to a hard-edged brush, I'm going to go ahead and paint in that shadow like so. And you'll see it won't paint anywhere else on this layer. Even though I started clear up here, it's still not painting outside of that. The reason why this method is a lot better is because it gets all the way to the edge. If you just select your shape, there'll be a few pixels on the outside edges that don't get covered. So creating a clipping mask is a much better method when you want to paint within a shape. Sometimes a clipping mask doesn't work for what you're trying to do, but for the most part, it's going to be your best option. Another nice thing about clipping masks is you can move the image around that's on the clipping layer and it still won't really affect your layer underneath. So what I mean by that is if I turn on my grab and move tool and then nudge my blue over with my arrow key, you'll see I can nudge it over until I get it lined up with the edge of my crate, but it also still stays within the shape of my crate. So that's really useful too. Now this time, rather than changing our blend mode from normal to overlay or multiply, what we're going to do is we're just going to bring the opacity down. Now I think my color is a little bit too light, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into my colors. I'm going to come down to about there, and I'm going to refill that in. And I'm getting this weird edge here that's pixelating, so I'm going to go ahead and select that and delete it. And now let's go ahead and bring the opacity down on this layer and see how that looks. I'm going to bring it to about 75%. And the reason why I'm leaving the blend mode on normal is because I still want to keep that blue. I don't want it to blend with my other colors and values. I want it to look really blue on this side. This is definitely a style choice and you don't have to do that. But for me, I think it looks much more interesting when my shadows are really deep and rich, cool colors. So I'm going to leave it like that for now. That brings us to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, you were able to put your crate together, and then you also learned how to create a different type of shadow with really rich, cool colors. In the next lecture, we're going to go ahead and add some more detail to this crate, such as nail heads, and we're also going to add some cuts and scrapes onto it. And then we're also going to paint in this edge to be blended a little bit more so it looks more hand painted. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. All right. Let's go ahead and add in that detail. So first off, I'm going to merge these two layers together. So my clipping mask and my crate. So I'm going to select both those and merge. So now that's one layer. So now we're going to be able to mess around with this blue shadow. Next, I'm going to go ahead and select my dark blue shadow from this side. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to use that to create the nail heads on my crate. The reason why I'm using this blue color is because when you use the same colors in an asset, it tends to pull it all together and make it look nicer. So I'm going to go ahead, add that in there, add that in there, one there, a little too far over. And the reason why I'm painting them like ellipses rather than circles is because we're looking at it from an angle, and so they're going to get squashed because of perspective. Next, I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit lighter version of this, so maybe about there. And I'll go ahead and paint in on top of that like so. one there, and a little bit right there. Perfect. Next, let's go ahead and reselect this dark shadow color on the blue side. And let's go ahead and paint in our nails on this side. And then we're going to go ahead and select a lighter version of that, so this color right here. We'll go ahead and paint that in, just like so. Now, these may seem like tiny little details that nobody will notice, but trust me, this is what's going to differentiate your artwork and make it look better than everybody else's, is the tiny little details. Next, let's go ahead and add in those cuts and scrapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my dark shadow color right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and shrink my brush size down as small as possible. And I'm going to pick some places where I want these cuts and gashes to be. So I'm going to put one right here. I just want them to be basically straight lines that kind of come to more of a point, so they can start out fatter and then come to a point. I'm also going to add one right here. And this one is actually going to travel across to the other side, like so. Perfect. And then I might add one out here on this outside. And then let's add some on this other side too. But we're going to select our dark blue color because that's the shadow color on our shadow side. So I'll add one there. We can add one here. You can also hold down Shift and click in another spot to get that straight line. And maybe we'll add one more up here. So right there. This one will be a little bit fatter. Perfect. Next, what we want to do is we want to select our highlight color. So coming over here, I'm going to select this color right there. And we want to make sure that we select the highlight color that's nearest to it. That way it's going to look more natural and not stand out as much as if we were to take this brighter color right here and add a highlight to this. So make sure you use the highlight color nearest to the cut. And then we're just going to highlight the bottom side of our cut because that's the side that would be getting hit by the light, just like so. Let's do the same for our other one. So we'll select this highlight color here, and then we'll go ahead and add that highlight in. And whenever it goes across sort of one of these wood grains, you can kind of leave some of that highlight out, as it would probably not be showing up because it would be going down into the crack of the wood grain. Let's go ahead and add this to the other parts. So we'll add it to this underside, same here. You saw there how I kind of skipped that area that goes down into the grain. Then let's do this side. So we're just going to select our highlight color in there, and then we'll add that in. Great. Lastly, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and blend this edge in so it's not such a hard line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select this color, and then using my brush tool and putting my brush opacity at 30%, I'm going to go ahead and brush in along this edge like so. And then I'm going to select this color that we got out of that, the mid color, and then I'm going to bring my brush opacity back up to 100%, and now I can paint over that edge like so, and that's going to give me a nice blend between those two colors. As we get up here to this area, what we want to do is we want to select sort of this darker shadow color, and then we're going to bring our brush opacity back down to 30%, paint right there, then we'll select this mid color, then come back to our brush tool, bring our brush opacity back up to 100%, and then continue to paint that in. Awesome. Our wooden crate looks pretty dang good. You should be very proud of yourself. Now let's go ahead and save this out so that you can share it to the Q&A section of the course. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off this frame right here, and I've already turned off my background drawing. And then I'm going to grab my crop tool, which is this tool right underneath my lasso tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. So I'll click it, and now I can grab these corners and I can drag them in like so and crop this image to the correct size. So right about there should be good. Let's go ahead and hit enter. Now, once you've done this, I want you to go ahead and save this out as a Photoshop document so you don't lose your work. But then I also want you to save it out as a JPEG. The way you save it out as a JPEG is by coming up to File, Save As, and then you're going to come down here to where it says Save As Type, and you're going to change that from a Photoshop file to a JPEG. Or you can save it out as a PNG. It doesn't really matter. Let's go ahead and hit Save. Awesome. So once you've saved this, go ahead and share it to the Q&A section of the course. I'm super excited to see your work, and thanks for joining me in this lecture.